Strip away your modern comforts for a second. Just picture this. You're standing in a prehistoric European forest, roughly 60,000 years ago, and you are facing a freezing, relentless rainstorm. But we're not talking about a few hours of drizzle here. We are talking weeks on end. In this environment, absolutely everything you need for survival, fire, food, just staying warm, it all becomes exponentially harder to get. So, welcome to our explainer on how our ancestors didn't just survive this endless rain, but actually completely mastered the wet world.
I mean, think about our modern experience of rain, right? When we're stuck inside during a storm, we're usually just, well, a bit bored. We've got a roof, we've got Wi-Fi, central heating, and we literally just wait it out. Now, contrast that with the incredibly unglamorous, relentless reality of early humans. For them, rain meant being totally exposed for weeks. It was arguably more consistently dangerous to their survival than almost anything with teeth. Sure, predators were a threat, but rain was this constant life or death battle that killed fires and rotted food in a heartbeat.
Section 1. The real threat of rain. Let's get right into it. Let's look at what actually happens to the human body in these extreme conditions, because the immediate problem wasn't drowning, it was rapid heat loss. Water conducts heat away from the human body roughly 25 times faster than air does. 25 times. That is a massive, massive difference. It means you don't even need freezing temperatures to be in lethal danger. If you've got wet clothes and just a mild 10-degree breeze, that combination could easily become a death sentence through hypothermia. Our ancestors saw this happen, and they knew they had to engineer solutions to combat this apex killer.
Which brings us to Section 2, Rethinking Fire and Shelter. To survive, they had to tackle the absolute hardest, most crucial element right off the bat: maintaining fire in a totally wet world. Look, early humans didn't start fires from scratch in the pouring rain. Can you even imagine trying to ignite wet wood with wet tinder using bare hands? No way. Instead, they treated fire the exact same way we treat electricity today. Fire was infrastructure, not an event. It was something they maintained continuously, sometimes over years and years, because the cost of losing it was just way too high. And to keep this infrastructure running, they actually developed incredibly specialized labor. Think of the ancient firekeeper. Their one and only job during a massive storm was to protect the embers so the group wouldn't wake up in the freezing dark. They would carefully wrap live embers in slow-burning organic material, stuff like damp moss or very specific fungus. They'd place them in enclosed containers and safely transport these smoldering materials across vast distances. Honestly, long before anyone was a specialist in medicine or hunting, someone was a specialist in fire.
But of course, a fire needs a dry place to survive, which brings us to shelter. And we really need to completely debunk the popular caveman myth right here. Caves are actually incredibly rare, they're often super damp, and they're geographically limited. Instead, ancient humans were brilliant architectural engineers. As far back as 400,000 years ago, hominins were intentionally angling branches and overlapping leaves in rows, specifically to shed water. They were operating on the exact same principle as a modern shingled roof.
And this brilliantly illustrates the immense cognitive leap our ancestors had to make. Just look at how they created waterproof materials. They didn't just casually throw an animal skin over their heads. No, they scraped and stretched raw hide, treated it with animal fats or smoke, and effectively invented waterproof leather. That requires abstract thinking. It requires understanding cause and effect across a delayed timeline. They were preparing and inventing waterproof gear weeks before the storm ever hit. So rain didn't just kill ancient humans, it actively pushed them to become smarter. Moving on to Section 3, Reading the Wet World. Let's step outside those physical shelters for a moment and look at how they survived by reading the landscape. Today, we completely outsource our weather awareness to a weather app on our phones, but ancient humans maintained this hypervigilant, continuous literacy of their environment. They relied on things like petrichor, that really distinct, earthy smell that signals rain is coming. They watched for low-flying birds, swarming insects, specific cloud textures. They read these signals as fluently as we read road signs, and it allowed them to accurately predict the weather hours before it arrived, giving them precious time to prepare. And deciding exactly where to ride out that storm was just as vital as reading the sky. They thoroughly understood the terrain rules for rain. They completely avoided valleys where cold, wet air naturally pools. They sought out south-facing slopes because, well, those get more sunlight and dry way faster. They camped deliberately under dense broadleaf tree canopies that intercepted the rainfall, and they exploited natural rock overhangs. They understood perfectly that water runs downhill, and they used this accumulated landscape knowledge to return to the absolute best sheltering spots generation after generation.
Section 4. The adapted human body. Now, shifting focus to the physiological level, our ancestors didn't just survive despite their bodies. They survived with bodies, uniquely calibrated to extreme elements. Continuous daily exposure to cold and wet conditions naturally suppress the deadly cold shock response that we modern humans often suffer from. But even more fascinating, they built metabolic adaptations. One key feature is brown adipose tissue. This is a highly specialized type of body fat found in cold-adapted populations that actually generates heat directly, rather than just storing energy for later. Because they couldn't just turn up a thermostat, their baseline physiology became fundamentally better prepared to handle the wet and the cold. This takes us to Section 5, Society as Survival Infrastructure. Let's see how all this builds into the social dimension, because the idea of surviving a prehistoric rainy season as some kind of lone wolf is pure modern fiction. Survival was entirely collective. The social bond itself was survival infrastructure. Think of it like they functioned as a giant human thermoregulation system. During a major storm, privacy was completely abandoned. The group would huddle densely together to retain shared body heat. The young, robust individuals were tasked with gathering resources, while the elders made the strategic decisions about where to shelter. And the children? They were kept safely protected right in the warm center of the group. This specific social structure highlights something truly profound about human history. Caring for older, non-reproductive individuals appeared very early on, and not just out of abstract altruism, but as a hardcore, rational survival mechanism. The death of an elder was a major survival event. If a group lost its elders, they lost irreplaceable institutional knowledge. They literally lost the accumulated database of exactly how to survive extreme, highly specific weather conditions. And notice how opportunistic their diets became during these times. I mean, rain doesn't pause hunger, right? When traditional plants got waterlogged and their standard game hid from the mud, the menu completely changed. They targeted exactly what the rain produced: earthworms surfacing in downpours, freshwater fish moving through flooded plains, fruiting fungi, snails, frogs. Dietary flexibility wasn't just a quirky personality trait, it was an absolutely necessary survival trait. And when they did find that food, they shared it. Individual hoarding in a brutal, rainy survival situation actively reduces group resilience. Seriously, a well-fed person in a starving group is just a casualty waiting to happen. Equitable sharing, on the other hand, sustains cooperation. Visible even today in hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists. Sharing food during brutally wet, lean seasons was a highly calculated survival mechanism that literally kept the entire group alive. Bringing this all together, we see a really stark contrast. Modern humans, given the choice, deeply prefer moderate, stable climates. Ancient humans, however, pushed everywhere, into perpetually wet temperate rainforests and violently flooded river deltas. You might wonder, why? Well, they actually sought out these brutal, rain-soaked environments because the extreme weather produced incredible abundance in plants, fungi, and wildlife. They decided the harshness of the rain was absolutely worth the incredible resources it brought with it. It really puts our current comforts into perspective, doesn't it? From the raincoat you wear, to the weather radar on your phone, to the massive drainage systems keeping water away from our modern buildings, every single technology we use to manage rain today is downstream of that wet, cold, firelit night. Our modern infrastructure is quite literally built upon the foundation of an ancient civilization of brilliant survival techniques. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. How much of our modern world, our intelligence, our incredibly complex social structures, was built simply because our ancestors stubbornly refused to give up and die in the rain? They figured it out first, using absolutely nothing but attention, accumulated knowledge, and pure human resilience to conquer the wettest corners of the earth. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I will catch you next time.